A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
You know, Herman, I was looking at some satellite imagery of the northern border this morning, and it is wild how much the literal silhouette of the horizon has changed in the last year and a half. We used to talk about the Golan Heights as this fixed, static line on a map, but looking at the summit of Mount Hermon right now, it looks less like a mountain and more like a massive high-altitude circuit board. The sheer density of the infrastructure they have hauled up there since the collapse in Damascus is staggering.
It really is a total transformation of the entire theater. I am Herman Poppleberry, by the way, for anyone joining us for the first time. And Korn, you are right about that visual shift. We are not just looking at a few new antennas or a fresh coat of paint on an old bunker. We are looking at a total architectural overhaul of the most strategic piece of dirt in the Levant. When you look at those images, you are seeing the physical manifestation of a doctrine shift. The era of the buffer zone is over, and the era of the permanent high ground garrison has begun.
Well, today's prompt from Daniel is about exactly that. He wants us to dig into the strategic significance of Mount Hermon for Israel's military defense, especially in light of the regime collapse in Syria and how the new government under Ahmad al-Sharaa is playing their side of the mountain. Daniel is basically asking us to explain why this one peak has become the center of gravity for the entire region as of late March 2026. It is the ultimate king of the hill game, but with nuclear-adjacent stakes.
It is the ultimate high ground. There is no other way to put it. When you are standing at 2,814 meters above sea level, which is the actual summit height, you are not just looking at a view. You are looking at a tactical cheat code. From that peak you can see all the way to the outskirts of Damascus, which is only 40 kilometers away. To put that in perspective for people, that is about 25 miles. You could practically see what someone is having for lunch in a Damascus cafe if your optics are good enough. And in 2026, the optics are definitely good enough.
And we know the optics are definitely that good. But before we get into the heavy tech, we should probably frame the why here. For 50 years, the summit was this weird frozen neutral zone. The United Nations Disengagement Observer Force, or UNDOF, sat up there in their little blue helmeted outposts, and the 1974 agreement kept everyone in their respective corners. It was a relic of the Cold War that somehow survived into the 21st century. But then December 2024 happens. The Assad regime vanishes like a bad dream, and suddenly that 50-year-old status quo is in the shredder.
The shredder is an understatement. When the central authority in Damascus evaporated, the buffer zone effectively ceased to exist as a security guarantee. Israel saw a vacuum that was about to be filled by either radical jihadist groups or remnants of Iranian-backed militias trying to find a new foothold in the chaos. So, they moved. They did not just move into the buffer zone, they took the summit. Historically, Israel only controlled the southern slopes up to about 2,200 meters, at a spot called Mitzpe Shlagim, or Snow Lookout. But now, as we sit here on March 25, 2026, the Israel Defense Forces are sitting on the very top of the mountain, looking down into the heart of the new Syria.
It is a bold move, and Defense Minister Israel Katz just doubled down on it last week, on March 18th. He said the IDF is staying there indefinitely, not until things settle down, not for the duration of the transition, but indefinitely. Which, if you are Ahmad al-Sharaa trying to build a new Syrian state, has to be a massive thorn in your side. It is basically Israel saying, we do not trust the new guy enough to give back the keys to the roof.
It is more than a thorn, it is a fundamental challenge to his domestic legitimacy. Imagine trying to tell your people you have liberated the country and are building a new, sovereign Syria while the neighboring military is literally sitting on your highest peak looking down your chimney. But the Israeli perspective is driven by what they call the eyes and ears doctrine. They cannot afford to be blind in that sector ever again, especially after the lessons of October 7th. The Hermon is not just a lookout post, it is a massive sensor array. It collects signals intelligence, provides early warning for missile launches, and serves as a relay for drone operations deep into the north and east. If you hold the Hermon, you hold the electromagnetic spectrum of the northern Levant.
I want to talk about the people actually doing the sitting on that peak because it sounds miserable. We are talking about the 8th Mountain Brigade, also known as the Harem Brigade. They were only formed about 2 years ago, in March 2024, specifically for this kind of high-altitude, extreme environment warfare. Herman, you have been reading up on their logistics. How do you even maintain a permanent military presence at nearly 3,000 meters when the mountain is buried in 10 feet of snow?
The logistics are actually the most fascinating part of the 18th Brigade's operations. They are not just regular infantry with heavier coats. They have the Alpinist unit, which is a specialized reservist force that lives for this stuff. They use snowmobiles, specialized tracked vehicles, and they have to be trained in everything from avalanche rescue to high-altitude medicine. When you are at that elevation, the air is thinner, the cold is bone-chilling, and your equipment behaves differently. Batteries die faster, metal becomes brittle, and even basic communication can be scrambled by the terrain.
And yet, they are not just surviving up there, they are conducting offensive operations. Just yesterday, March 24th, the 8th reported these targeted raids near Kefar Chuba and Jabal Sadana. They are finding Hezbollah tunnels and weapons complexes in areas that were supposedly monitored for decades. It makes you wonder what the UN was actually doing up there for 50 years, if you can just walk in and find an entire tunnel network. It is like finding a basement you never knew your house had, except the basement is full of anti-tank missiles.
The reality is that the UN mandate was designed for a conventional war between two state armies, not for a subterranean guerrilla insurgency. The tunnels the IDF found yesterday were built into the limestone of the mountain, hidden under the cover of the dense brush and the steep terrain. By taking the high ground on the Hermon, the 8th Brigade can now use ground-penetrating radar and acoustic sensors from a vertical advantage. They are essentially looking into the mountain from above rather than trying to peek over the fence from below. It is a total shift from passive monitoring to active, high-altitude denial.
It is like having the ultimate God view in a strategy game. But let us flip the perspective for a second. We have Ahmad al-Sharaa, who used to be Abu Muhammad al-Julani, now trying to play the role of the statesman in Damascus. He is demanding a withdrawal as a precondition for any security pact. On one hand, he is deploying the 52nd and 84th Divisions to the borders of Lebanon and Iraq to stop Hezbollah smuggling, which is exactly what Israel wants. He is acting like a partner in security, but he is getting zero credit in terms of territorial concessions. That has to be a tough sell for him internally.
It is a classic geopolitical deadlock. Al-Sharaa is doing the work. On March 5th, he moved thousands of troops to block those infiltration routes. He is trying to show the world, and specifically the United States, that the new Syria is not a terminal for Iranian proxies. He wants to be seen as a legitimate, responsible actor. But from the Israeli Security Cabinet's point of view, al-Sharaa is still an unknown quantity. He might be doing the right things today, but what happens in 3 years? If Israel gives up the Hermon summit and the new Syrian government collapses or pivots back to a hostile stance, getting that high ground back would cost hundreds, if not thousands, of lives in a conventional assault.
So the indefinite tag on the occupation is basically a hedge against the inherent instability of a post-revolutionary state. It is a trust, but verify, and also keep the keys to your front door kind of policy. But we cannot talk about the Hermon without talking about the water. This is not just about antennas and snipers. Roughly 1/3 of Israel's water resources come from the Jordan River headwaters that start right there on that mountain. If you control the snowmelt, you control the lifeblood of the region.
The water security aspect is often overshadowed by the military hardware, but it is just as vital. The Hermon acts as a giant sponge. The snowmelt feeds the 3 main tributaries of the Jordan, the Dan, the Benias, and the Hasbani. Historically, the Benias Spring was a major flashpoint. In the 1960s, the Arab League tried to divert these headwaters to bypass Israel, which was one of the primary triggers for the 6-Day War. By occupying the summit and the Syrian side of the slopes, Israel has effectively secured the entire catchment area. They no longer have to worry about a hostile neighbor diverting the headwaters. It is the ultimate strategic insurance policy against thirst.
It is a total shift in the concept of defensible borders. We have moved from the old green line to the blue line, and now to what looks like a white line dictated by the snowcaps. But what about the people living at the base? You have got Majd al-Shams, the largest Druze town in the Golan, sitting right at the foot of the mountain. They have family on both sides of that border. For them, this indefinite occupation of the summit must be incredibly surreal. They went from being on the edge of a frozen conflict to being the backyard of a permanent military fortress.
The Druze community is in a very delicate position. For decades, they maintained the blood brother pact with the Israeli state while officially remaining loyal to the Syrian motherland, mostly to protect their relatives in the Jabal al-Druze region of Syria. But with the Assad regime gone, that dynamic is shifting. Some see the Israeli presence on the summit as a protective shield against the chaos that followed the revolution. Others see it as a permanent barrier to their dream of a unified Druze identity across the border. It is worth listening to our older episode, number 1259, where we went deep into the Druze survival strategy. It really helps explain why they are not necessarily protesting this new military reality as loudly as you might expect. They are pragmatists who have survived centuries of regime changes by knowing which way the wind blows.
It is pragmatism over everything else. If the choice is an Israeli brigade on the mountain, or a chaotic vacuum where remnants of ISIS or Hezbollah might set up shop, the choice is pretty clear for most people on the ground. But let us get back to the technical side of the 18th Brigade. You mentioned they've established 9 new military posts inside what was formerly Syrian territory. Are these just temporary camps, or are we talking about permanent fortifications? Because 9 posts is a lot of concrete to pour in a transition zone.
These are significant installations, Corn. We are talking about reinforced concrete, deep underground bunkers, and massive sensor towers that can withstand direct hits. 2 of these posts are right on the summit itself, at that 2,814-meter mark. They are designed to withstand heavy artillery and the kind of extreme weather that would shut down a normal base. The Israeli Engineering Corps has been working triple shifts to get these finished before the next major winter cycle. The goal is to create a seamless digital wall that covers every square inch of the valley below. They are using AI-driven surveillance that can distinguish between a wild animal and a human infiltrator in total darkness or heavy fog, which is very common up there.
It is a massive investment. You do not build 9 permanent fortifications and an elite mountain brigade just for a temporary border excursion. It feels like we are witnessing the birth of a new garrison state model on the northern border. But here is the thing that gets me, Herman. If Israel stays indefinitely and al-Sharaa keeps demanding they leave, does this just become the new Shebaa farms? A permanent excuse for low-level conflict that never quite resolves?
That is the big risk. For those who do not remember the Shebaa Farms dispute, we covered that in episode 961. It was this tiny sliver of land that became the pretext for Hezbollah's continued resistance long after Israel left Lebanon in the year 2000. The Hermon summit could easily become Shebaa Farms on steroids. It is much larger, much more strategic, and much more visible. If al-Sharaa wants to prove his nationalist credentials to the more hardline elements of his coalition, he almost has to make the liberation of the Hermon a central part of his platform.
But he is also a smart guy. He knows he cannot win a conventional fight against the IDF, especially not when they have the literal high ground. So he is going the diplomatic route, trying to get the United States to mediate. It is a fascinating pivot. The former leader of an insurgent group is now using the language of international law and sovereign borders to try and nudge a nuclear-armed neighbor off a mountain peak. He is trading his suicide vest for a suit and a briefcase, and he is doing it quite effectively.
It shows how much the world has changed since 2024. Al-Sharaa is playing a long game. He is trying to build a modern state, and that requires international recognition and investment. He knows that as long as there is a disputed territory status on his border, major Western companies are going to be hesitant to pour money into Syrian reconstruction. So for him, getting Israel off the Hermon is not just about pride, it is about the economy. He needs that mountain back to prove Syria is a whole, sovereign country again.
I wonder if there is a middle ground here. Could we see a return to a UN-style monitoring force, but with much sharper teeth? Or maybe a joint security arrangement? Though, given the history, joint security with a former HDS leader sounds like something out of a techno-thriller novel. It is hard to imagine an IDF colonel and a former insurgent commander sharing a coffee and a radar screen.
It is hard to imagine a joint arrangement in the current climate. The trust just is not there. What is more likely is a de facto reality where Israel stays, Syria protests, but both sides cooperate quietly on the things that matter, like stopping the flow of Captagon and preventing Iranian proxies from regrouping. We have seen this hostile cooperation model work in other parts of the world. It is not pretty, it is not stable, but it keeps the lights on and the missiles in their silos.
It is the status quo, 2.0. But it feels more fragile this time. The fact that the IDF found those tunnels just yesterday tells me that the mountain is still very much a hot zone. Those tunnels were not built by ghosts. Someone was working on them recently. Whether it was a Hezbollah sleeper cell or a local militia looking for leverage, it proves that holding the peak is not enough. You have to hold the entire vertical space, from the tunnels underground to the drones in the air.
And that is why the 8th Brigade is so busy. They are doing these constant clearance operations. It is not just about sitting in a bunker, it is about active patrolling in some of the most difficult terrain on Earth. If you look at the geography of Kfar Tuba and Jabal Sadana, where they were operating on March 24th, these are steep, rocky areas with lots of natural caves. It is a defender's dream and an attacker's nightmare. By moving into those areas now, Israel is trying to sanitize the border before a new threat can mature. They are essentially weeding the garden before the weeds can take root.
It is a proactive defense, but it also expands the friction zone. The more territory you hold, the more surface area you have for potential attacks. It is the classic paradox of the buffer zone. You move forward to create space, but now you have a longer line to defend. You have gone from defending a fence to defending a mountain range.
The difference here is the quality of the eyes. In the past, Israel was trying to see through the mountain using ground sensors and satellite passes. Now, they are looking down from it with permanent high-fidelity optics. The technical advantage of having your sensors at 2,800 meters cannot be overstated. You are above the weather most of the time. You have a direct line of sight for microwave communications. You can track low-flying drones that would otherwise be hidden by the clutter of the hills. It is a massive force multiplier that makes the longer line easier to manage.
So, for the listeners who are trying to wrap their heads around what this means for the next few months, what should they be watching for? If this is a new order, what are the tripwires we should be looking at?
I would watch the diplomatic track in Washington. If al-Sharaa gets a meeting with high-level American officials, that is a sign that his sovereignty argument is gaining traction. On the military side, watch the 8th Brigade's activity level. If they start building even more permanent infrastructure, like paved roads or heavy-duty power lines up to the new summit posts, that tells you the indefinite stay is being baked into the long-term budget. And finally, keep an eye on the water. If there is any move by the Syrian side to start drilling or diverting near the headwaters, that will be an immediate red line for Israel.
It is a high-stakes game of King of the Hill, except the hill is a massive limestone massif that controls the water and the airwaves for 3 different countries. It is wild to think that after 50 years of stability, we are back to this kind of raw, territorial competition. It makes you realize how much we took that old UNDOF mandate for granted, even if it was flawed. It provided a predictable framework that is now completely gone.
The era of the unarmed observer is effectively over in the Middle East. We are moving into an era of active high ground denial. If you cannot hold the peak yourself, you have to make sure no one else can either. And right now, Israel has decided that the only way to be sure is to be the one standing on the summit. They have traded the blue helmets for white snowsuits and high-tech sensors.
It is a heavy burden, literally and figuratively. I mean, just the cost of keeping those snowplows running at 9,000 feet has to be astronomical. But I guess when the alternative is being blind to a potential invasion or a water crisis, the price tag starts to look a lot more reasonable. It is the cost of doing business in a neighborhood that just went through a seismic shift.
Security is expensive, but losing a war is even more expensive. That is the logic driving the cabinet in Jerusalem right now. They are willing to pay the diplomatic and financial price of the Hermon occupation because they believe the alternative is a catastrophic security failure. It is a hard-nosed, realist approach to a very messy post-revolutionary landscape. They are choosing the certainty of the peak over the uncertainty of the valley.
Well, it certainly makes for a fascinating, if slightly terrifying, map to look at. I think we have given people a pretty solid framework for why this mountain matters so much in 2026. It is not just a ski resort anymore. It is the most important piece of real estate in the Levant. It is the anchor for the entire northern defense strategy.
It always was. We just had 50 years of pretending it was a park. Now the mask is off, and the strategic reality is plain for everyone to see. The mountain has reclaimed its role as the sentinel of the north.
For anyone who wants to dive deeper into the political side of this, definitely check out episode 1132, where we talked about Ahmad al-Sharaa and the new order in Syria. It really rounds out the picture of who Israel is actually dealing with across that new border. It is a great companion piece to this technical breakdown.
And episode 961 on the Shabbat farms for the historical context of these border disputes. It is amazing how much of the past is being recycled in this new conflict. The names change, but the geography remains the same.
Alright, let us look at some practical takeaways for anyone following this. First, the UN buffer era is dead. If you are looking for international mandates to solve these high ground disputes, you are looking at a ghost. The future is bilateral security pacts or de facto military occupations. Second, watch the water. If you want to know why a specific ridge or peak is being fought over, follow the springs. And third, the technical sophistication of mountain warfare has hit a new level. The 8th Brigade is a blueprint for how modern militaries are going to handle difficult terrain going forward.
I would also add that we should be watching the Druze community as a bellwether. They are the ultimate survivors in this landscape. If they start shifting their public stance significantly, it is a sign that the underlying security balance has moved. They are the human barometer of the Golan.
That is a great point. They have a knack for sensing which way the wind is blowing before anyone else. Well, this has been a deep dive. My brain feels like it has been at 9,000 feet for the last 20 minutes. I might need some supplemental oxygen.
It is a lot to process, but that is why we do this. These weird prompts from Daniel always lead us to the most interesting corners of the world. It is about connecting the dots between a snowy peak and a diplomatic cable.
They really do. I think we can wrap it there for today. We have covered the eyes and ears, the water, the 8th Brigade, and the diplomatic deadlock. It is a complex picture, but a vital one.
A solid tour of the mountain. I am glad we could shed some light on it.
Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show. We literally could not do this without that processing power.
This has been My Weird Prompts. We are so glad you joined us for this exploration of the high ground. It is a pleasure to have you with us.
If you're enjoying the show, a quick review on your podcast app really does help us reach new listeners. It is the best way to support what we are doing here and keep these deep dives coming.
You can also find us at myweirdprompts.com for the full archive and all the ways to subscribe. We have a lot of history buried in those archives.
Stay curious, stay sharp, and we will see you on the next one.
Goodbye, everyone.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the close from sloth, from man, from long-eared host. My Weird Prompts, until next time, stay curious, keep